Greetings, and welcome to Chaim's weekly podcast, recorded live in Richardson, Texas. We invite you now to join us for one of our synagogue's Shabbat messages.
All right. What I really want to do is kind of walk us through some of the aspects of a biblical narrative. We want to learn how to be able to not argue with people when they have questions, rather than responding to those questions in a combative way, in an argumentative way. We want to find other ways to respond to the persistent questions that people have about about right and wrong, and about how we live, and about what our faith is. When I say that, well, there's only one God, you can't see him, but I know there's only one God and there's only one way to him, people tend to want to argue about that. Their response naturally is going to be, because there's got to be, everyone knows this story about, it's really a Hindu story about this mountain, and all these paths go up this mountain and they all lead to the same thing. I was at a minister's luncheon recently, and the president of the university, who ought to know better because he's a believer, celebrated that. He said, this kind of diversity is awesome and wonderful, and there are many paths to the Most High. And I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, how do we deal with this? I can argue with him, or I can say, well, I don't agree with that, and here's why. There are many paths up the mountain, I agree, but they don't all lead to the right place. And we need to be able to develop a narrative where these questions fit into the narrative. And people will have a sense of what we believe, why we believe it, and just as importantly, why we're constrained in our values. Okay, so there are three threads that I think are a part of this story, and I want to kind of introduce them, and we'll go into some detail in at least one of them. We'll see how much time we have. And these threads that we need to have an understanding of so that we can put questions into perspective are simply these things. There are two worlds that exist simultaneously. There is, I've talked about this a little bit, the kingdom of heaven. There's the world of sin and death. The problem is that the kingdom of heaven is at once visible but not visible, because people on the outside, they don't perceive it as a separate kingdom. What are the boundaries of the kingdom of heaven? Get out your GPS and you say, well, it starts up here, and that's not the kingdom of heaven. We tend, especially us in the Messianic Jewish world, we tend to want to equate the kingdom of heaven with the land of Israel. But I want to point out something that may be a surprise to even us, that when the Most High was partitioning out the land, he said, don't mistake who owns the land. You don't own it. Isn't that this week's Torah portion? It's his land. He says, you can't buy and sell the land because I own title to it. You are strangers and aliens with me on the face of the earth. That's where the kingdom of heaven is wherever God's people are. And outsiders can't perceive that. What's the kingdom of sin and death? What are its geographical boundaries? The whole world, literally the whole world. Everything that we know, what's normal for human existence, is part of what the Bible calls the world of sin and death. And we need to have a clear understanding of what those two worlds are, of how they're distinguished, and so that we can describe to people to say, okay, this knowledge that you have, this understanding you have, this idea you have about who God should be or not, or isn't, really emanates from this kingdom. And kingdoms have rulers, they have rules and regulations, and they have ways of thinking. And if we can describe to people that, then we begin the task of making separations and distinctions. Okay, at the very beginning of the Bible, this is, when you read Genesis 1 and 2, what do most people think of when you read that? Oh, we're talking science, creationism versus evolution. Hey, nice hat. Good to see you, Trey. People automatically think, oh, you're going to talk science, evolution versus creation. But I'm going to submit to you that maybe the story in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 actually can start us off pointing us into these two worlds instead of getting caught in this tar pit of arguing science. And I know people who actually have Nobel laureates in the physical sciences. So it's a very difficult subject if you want to argue science. And you really do have to have a graduate degree if you want to speak with any intelligence. But I think that the main point of the Genesis story is this idea of God making separations and distinctions. If you look through the creation story, Genesis chapter 1, how many times do you see the word separate and distinction? You see those concepts all the way through that. On the first day, what happened? And the Lord created light, and there was darkness, and there's a separation and a distinction between the two. This actually sets the theme of the rest of the Bible. There are two worlds. There's a world of light, of the Spirit of God and His presence, and it's orderly. There's the world of darkness, where everything's in chaos, and it's it's a dog-eat-dog world, every man for himself. It's a world of chaos, and nobody knows what the rules are. They just kind of do what's right in their own eyes. The Bible starts out with this sense of separation and distinction. And when you talk to people about the creation story, rather than jumping into, oh, did God do it in this sequence or that sequence, deflect the argument. Say, no, there's another picture here that we can focus on that leads naturally to talking about the Messiah. Because once you have two worlds, then they're in conflict. There's a relationship between them. And if I'm an inhabitant of this world and the person I'm talking to is a citizen of this other world, now we have something to talk about. It's a natural way to relate those two worlds, and of course the only bridge between them, which is the Messiah. So we need to learn, I think, how to deflect arguments that really emanate from the world of sin and death. We're going to argue about how this happened and how that happened, and instead, let's talk about separation and distinction and start talking about these two worlds. The point of Genesis chapter 1 is not, and I'm talking as a PhD chemist here, it's not, I repeat, it's not how God put the earth together. The point of the Genesis 1 story is the creation of Adam and Eve. That is the center. Everything leads up to that. All this other stuff is supporting characteristics. God puts together this whole world in order that Adam and Eve will have a job. He's essentially creating a job for them. Their job is threefold. I think I said something about this. To fill the creation, to subdue it. We have to exert control over the creation, and we're supposed to guard it because it's not ours. It's actually, the Lord is the one that causes the plants to grow and does all these things. And so there's this sense where we are supposed to recognize these distinctions and separations and maintain them and use them in order to build the creation. In the same way, I want to make a direct connection here between that task and our task as the inhabitants and the citizens of the kingdom of heaven. Our job is to build the kingdom of heaven. We have authority in the kingdom of heaven. The rules are clear. We have the Torah. The Messiah didn't by accident just say, if you're my disciples, you'll keep my commandments. John was not accidental when he said, by this we know that he loves us and we love him, that we walk in his commandments. These are the rules of the road for the kingdom of heaven. This is how we order our lives. Okay? in such a way, we can now make a distinction and a separation between the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of sin and death. And this is a consistent thread all the way through the Bible. They're not readily discernible. They're not easily recognized. However, we have two worlds here that are consistently described in this narrative thread. There are two paths. We talked about a little bit about those, the path of wisdom, the path of folly, learning to trust in God versus learning to trust in our own concept of what's right. There are two ways. Proverbs 12:15, if you guys want to take notes. 14:12, 16:2. Am I speaking too fast? All those numbers. 1, 2, 8, 7, and 5. No. Proverbs 12:15. 12:15. At least that's what's in my notes. Proverbs 14:12. Proverbs 16:2. Matthew 7:13. 2 Peter 2:15. These are ones that you can look up as you have time. I really want to give you some resources and some notes. Matthew 7:13. These are just pictures of these two paths. There's a right way, there's a wrong way. There's a narrow way, there's a broad way. We talked about knowledge. There are two kinds of knowledge. Excuse me. Genesis 2:9, Genesis 2:17, Genesis 3:1 through 13. We have our own idea of how to do something. God has another idea. Proverbs 16:2. There are two characteristics in the world. And Judaism has been focused on learning how to make distinctions between tahor. Does anyone know what that word means? We have a few Israelis here, right? Clean, that which is ritually clean. And what's the distinction? Tameh, which is unclean. Okay. Do you realize that that is a big part of our task in the world, is to learn to make distinctions between those? This was so important to the Most High that he killed two people over this. The two sons of Aaron. What was the response after they died because they were offering an alien fire that was not commanded? Right after that, all of the commandments about making distinctions start to come. Our task as believers, our task in the kingdom of heaven, is to train ourselves to be able to make distinctions between these two worlds. We have to make a distinction between what is clean and what is unclean so that we can learn spiritual distinctions between good and evil. Hebrews 5:14. Does anyone know that passage? Solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to discern good and evil. It's a direct relationship to what the Kohanim and the Levites were commanded to do. You shall make distinctions so you can teach the people of Israel to make distinctions. And the ultimate goal of that is to be able to recognize the boundaries between these two worlds. Because we live in both worlds. Let me say this again. We live in both worlds at the same time. Everyone is born into the kingdom of sin and death. This is why we get these instructions about when a woman gives birth, she's unclean for a certain amount of time. Because what she's done is birth someone right into the world of sin and death. And we have to be able to recognize when we cross over from one world into another. This is really important for us today because in our world, the boundaries just aren't there. People, they don't recognize that there are these two worlds. The world is all we have, and my morals are all I have, my values are all I have. Our job is to make distinctions between these two worlds. And so hopefully we can learn something of how the Bible describes these two worlds so that we can describe to people there is a boundary. And you're actually in the kingdom of sin and death, because until they recognize that, they have no place to come to. They don't realize that they need to come over. So there is tahor, tameh, Genesis 7:2, Leviticus 10, 8 through 11. Ezekiel 44, 23. Luke 11:39. Hebrews 5:14 and 10:22. Both of these passages all speak of clean and unclean and their relationship to these two worlds. So there is a relationship between the physical and the spiritual. The things that we do physically, if we're really God's servants, they are designed to teach us about these two worlds that we can't readily perceive. In everything that you do, whether it's eating or drinking or working, we're doing this for the glory of the Most High. And so these become our tools rather than us becoming slaves to them. They become tools to teach us about these two worlds. So we want to have a clear idea of what they are. One world is associated with obedience to the Most High. The other one is associated with rebellion. Do you realize that when you come into the kingdom of heaven, when you become a believer, the very first word that becomes operative is not freedom, but obedience? There were many priests, we're told, after the Shavuot, when the Messiah gave his spirit, who came to what Luke calls the obedience of faith. When we come into the kingdom of heaven, you know, the whole story of the Passover, it's a story of redemption. We're being purchased where we're owned by the king of the kingdom of sin and death, and we're being purchased, and now we're owned, as it were, lock, stock, and barrel by the Most High. We become his servants, and we pass from rebellion and chaos, where everything about us is lawlessness and rebellion against God, to where we're obedient to him. And this should be the attitude of those of us who are in his kingdom. So there is obedience and there's rebellion. And the person in the kingdom of sin and death will hear commandments like, you have to live in a certain way, there's certain things you're not allowed to do, there's certain attitudes you're not allowed to have, and they'll say, I don't want anything to do that. People who are in the world of sin and death actually come from Texas. And their anthem is, don't fence me in, right? I'm a cowboy. I grew up in Idaho, okay? I know what it means to not be fenced in. I want to do it my way. The other national anthem of the world of sin and death is some guy named Frank Sinatra, right? I did it my way. That is a characteristic of the kingdom of sin and death. And we need to be able to not argue with people about this, but explain this to them. Yes, this is your way. This is your world. This is the rules of the road. You do things your way. I understand that. But in this kingdom, the rules are very different. Somebody else calls the shots. I don't. It's his kingdom. I'm his servant, not the other way around. I think a real famous Texas preacher put it this way, and he was wrong. He said, put God to work for you in this divinely ordered capitalistic society. This is not the attitude we should have. We're his servants, and we follow his rules. So it's important that we learn them, even if we don't like them, because he's the boss, not me. And we need to be able to describe this to people. One is associated with darkness. One is associated with light. Genesis 1:4, right at the very beginning, you've got light and darkness. And it's no accident that the Messiah is introduced in the same way, John 1:5. The light shines in the darkness. The darkness doesn't comprehend it. He is the light of the world. Psalm 18:28, Psalm 82:5, Isaiah 5:20, Isaiah 9:2. These are wonderful passages that if we had more time, we actually go through and ruminate on them. But I'm expecting you guys to go home and do your homework, right? You'll come back next week and you'll know these all by heart. I don't yet. Matthew 4:15, John 3:19, 2 Corinthians 6:14, Philippians 2:15. There's light and there's darkness. We're children of light, not of darkness. And so we need to recognize there's a separation, there's a distinction between these two worlds. So you see how the creation story itself can help us to start building this narrative when we talk to people. By the way, the last thing I want you to do is think that you can convince a person in 10 minutes to become a believer. Now, when I was in seminary, I had to take an evangelism class because it was an evangelical seminary that I was at. And in this evangelism course, they did a whole lot of work in trying to get us to learn. You got this 10-minute window, and you got to present the gospel and convert people in 10 minutes. I can't even tell you my name in 10 minutes, okay? I can't. You can't do that. You can't get to know somebody in 10 minutes. What I'm suggesting is for people who are interested, you'll learn to build a dialogue. You'll learn to have conversations. These are the sorts of things. When you're going for a walk, you talk with people about them. When you're sitting down for coffee, or lunch, or dinner, or whatever, you sit. These are conversation pieces, and you need to develop a consistent story so you have something to talk about. In this same class, this was a good thing that came out of this class, but the professor put it this way. He said, I teach these introductory level classes, and there might be 150 kids in there. I'm old now, so I can say college students are kids. Okay. They're sitting there, and he says, and I always start out in this way. He says, I select 3 or 4 nice-looking young ladies and bring them up to the front, and I say, and I kind of go through this. I ask them, I said, so you come into class and you sit down, and there's this nice-looking guy right next to you. And you listen for 10 minutes to the class, and he turns to you and he says, will you marry me? Well, that happens today, actually, but what's the normal response? What's the proper response? The girl's going to look at him and says, are you crazy? I don't even know your name. You realize that when we ask people to make a statement of faith, to make a confession of faith in the Messiah, we're asking them to enter into a marriage contract and a marriage relationship. You don't do that quickly. It's not something where you introduce someone, you shake their hand. Oh yeah, you're just awesome. I don't know you from Adam, so to speak, to use a biblical metaphor. And so he says, okay, so he sits and you listen to the lecture and you go out into the hall and you talk for 15 minutes and then he asks you to marry you. What are you going to do? All the girls said, no way I just don't know enough about him. We need to approach the good news in the same way. We're asking people to commit to something that radically changes their life and it's irrevocable. And it's a scary thing. We need to understand that it's a scary thing to trust your life to someone you can't see. Someone who's hidden from you, and he says, I'm hidden from you. Remember, God is hidden from us, and I can't show you him. No one has seen God at any time, and he's the one that we follow. It's a big step. And we need to give people, we need to honor people enough to say, I want you to make this decision with your eyes wide open. There are many examples of this in the Bible. One example in particular, the Messiah says, if anyone wants to follow me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me if you want to be in the kingdom of heaven. For what person, when he's going to build a tower, doesn't sit down and first calculate the cost? What's it going to cost to finish this task? Otherwise, he gets started, and he gets a quarter of the way done, and he runs out of money, and all his investors are left, and he looks like a fool. If you're coming into the kingdom of heaven, this is a life-shattering event. And this is something if we really care for people, we need to give them the time to know who they're trusting their very life to. And so I encourage you, don't work on 10 minutes. Work on 10 weeks. Develop relationships with people so that you can answer their questions, or not always answer, but address their questions. Say, I know a God who knows these things. He actually created us. He understands us, and he's worthy of being trusted. So take your time with people. Don't try to hurry. because you're just one of many people in their lives. And if you sell them a story under false pretenses, we have warnings about that. There are two warnings. One of them is a parable in the Gospels. So this guy has a house, and he cleans it out, and he empties it out, and makes everything put in order. And there are demons that have lived there, and they get kicked out of it, right? And so they take off, and they're out there in the world, and they can't find any place. I guess they're not in the kingdom of heaven. I mean, they're not in the kingdom of sin and death, right? They can't find any place to live, so what do? They come back, and they say, well, let's go check on the place we were at before. And he says, look, it's empty, it's clean, it's in order. So he calls 7 of his friends. These spirits all come back, and the last state of the person is worse than the beginning. We don't want people to come into the kingdom under false pretenses, because if we say, look, just come as you are, we have no rules here. I've heard people say this. We have no rules. Just everything's okay. Just come in. We're not going to judge you, your lifestyle, anything like that. 2 years later, they find out that nobody approves of our gay lifestyle, or nobody here approves of the fact that we refuse to get married. Or I have this meth lab down the road. I'm from Kentucky. There's a lot of that, okay? I actually do. I do chemistry. I have a lab, but I have a license, so I'm okay. I have a DEA license, so I'm okay. When they find out that these things aren't approved, they're confused. They say, well, you told me just come as I am. God just doesn't care about these things. All he cares about is my heart. And now you're telling me I got to change my life? It's a false pretense. And people will turn away. And I know a lot of them that walk away. I have friends that have walked away from the faith over these very issues because they were literally sold a bill of goods. In Hebrews, we're actually warned about this. Now, this is perhaps a little different perspective than you might think of this passage. But I tend to approach this particular passage as descriptive. This is what happens when we introduce people to the Messiah in a way that is deceptive, where we don't tell them the whole story. Once someone has tasted of the Spirit of God and of enlightenment in the kingdom of heaven, and he turns away, what does Hebrews say? It's impossible to remove them again to repentance. I don't think that that's a theological statement. I think that's a descriptive statement. If people come in and they taste, and then because it's not what they expected and they turn away, I can promise you it's much, much more difficult to speak to those people of the good news because they've been inoculated. They know the language, they know the lingo, they know our weaknesses because they've lived among us. And now I can't reach them. Let's not do that to people. Let's give them the opportunity to make a decision that's going to change their life. It took me over 4 years to come to faith. 4 years and a suicide attempt to come to faith. But 30 years later, I still know the Lord. A lot of my friends who their coming to faith was quick and easy. Many of these guys, they'll have nothing to do with faith now, and you see it in their lives. Their lives are just chaos. So I'm encouraging you to recognize these two worlds, to learn to develop this narrative, the kingdom of sin and death, the kingdom of heaven, two worlds in simultaneous existence. One of them, and this is an interesting thing, especially when you're talking to college students. One is associated with clothes. The other is associated with nakedness. One is associated with clothing, clean and beautiful and presentable. And the other is associated with nakedness and shame. Okay? I've spent a lot of my years on college campuses. Clothing is a huge issue for college students. When my daughter went to college, it's a funny story. She went to college and she went to this uppity-guppity college, right? A real ultra selective liberal arts college. So most of her friends were really, really wealthy. Her roommate's name was Eisner, last name, a nice Jewish girl, okay? It's really rich people go there and their kids go there. And so, of course, the kind of clothes they wear are pretty nice and expensive. And my daughter, her favorite place to shop is Goodwill. Okay? Okay. So it was a potential disaster when she shows up on campus in her Goodwill clothes. But guess what the rage was that year? Goodwill, the Goodwill look. And so all these really rich college students were just scouring the Goodwill stores for the right kind of clothes. Audrey just felt right at home. It was great. Okay. My point is, clothing is important to people. People don't show up in public, by and large, they don't show up in public without wearing clothes. Because when you take your clothes off, what happens? There's an inherent sense of shame. And this is the same thing the world over. C.S. Lewis wrote about it in his Mere Christianity and the Abolition of Man. He's talking about natural law. And he says there's this sense of shame with being unclothed that is universal the world over. And the popularity of the South Beach and whatever in Florida and in Hawaii, the popularity of that, of people running around with absolutely nothing on or almost nothing on, is a statement against that sense of shame. Everybody understands this. You go into a class in college, everybody's dressed, they're of course dressed to impress, and they're not going to take their clothes off in the middle of the classroom. They're just not going to do that. Everybody understands this. Well, that's a consistent thread throughout the Bible. It's a second major thread that I think we need to understand. There's a kingdom of heaven, there's a world of sin and death, and there are rules and regulations and concepts of right and wrong that emanate from both of those worlds. We talked about some of that, the two kinds of knowledge before. But clothing is really a neat way to describe people's relationship with God. It starts with Adam and Eve. So let's kind of walk through this just a little bit. I want to kind of focus on this because, excuse me, I have to cough. Just a minute. Nasty stuff. Clothing is actually one of the most consistent and central threads all the way through the Bible. And it's a concept that people today can understand. It's like I said, you talk to someone about clothes and they understand what it means to be unclothed, and there's a natural shame that's associated with that. Well, the Bible uses that to great effect to explain probably the very hardest thing for people to wrap their hands around, and that's the concept of sacrifice. You realize that sacrifice and clothing are very, very closely related. In fact, God uses the language of clothing to explain sacrifice. So you tell a person, you're going to go to hell unless you believe in Jesus' sacrifice for you. He had to die for you. Today, when you say that, what do people look? They give you a blank look and they say, would you speak English? I don't understand what you're saying. What does sacrifice mean? I mean, we live in a world where people think that chickens come from plastic. Okay? We don't know what it means to see an animal die. Very few people anymore live in a rural environment where they get to do that. Last time we were in Texas, my youngest son actually got to do that. He got to kill some 400 chickens because we were staying with a family who has a chicken farm, and he got to help in that. So he got to know what it means to kill chickens. It's not he still has nightmares over it. It was fun. But here's the point. We don't know how to communicate to people about sacrifice, because most people in the first place, they have no concept of the biblical idea of sacrifice and substitutionary death. These are just words that have no meaning to people. When you say sacrifice, what does the modern American think? Seventh inning stretch, right? Sacrifice fly. They think in terms of that. Or, sacrifice means that, it's like when you go buy gas. Arm, leg, firstborn child, right? The more it hurts, the better it must be. That's what sacrifice means. So I must pay off some deity So I've got to make it expensive. That's the modern concept of sacrifice. Or, a sacrifice fly in baseball where you get yourself out in order to advance the team. Okay? That's not the biblical concept of sacrifice. And the biblical concept of sacrifice is actually wrapped up in this idea of clothing. When I first introduced this concept to this group of college guys who had originally wanted to talk about creation and evolution, and they were just amazed when I pointed out that all of these arguments about the existence of God that they get into, it's not a biblical concept. It's not something that we're told to do. We're actually told that the more you look for God, the more he hides from you. And we can't see him. They were so amazed, they wanted to hear more. And then when I said, okay, let's talk about clothing, because they wanted to know about sacrifice, I said, well, let's talk about clothes. And we started going through this passage. It was so neat to see these guys saying, I think I understand why God says we have to have a sacrifice. And so I want to just walk through that a little bit. Okay, it all began. Yeah, I got some here. I'm sorry, I just have to do this. It all began with Adam and Eve. We learned, if we know the story at all, that the first thing that they knew was that they were naked and that they had shame associated with that. And all through the Bible now, nakedness is associated with shame. Nakedness is associated with being separated from God. We can't see him because we're naked and we have shame. And so we're not only separated from him, but we don't even want to be around him. And so when people encounter the idea of God, what's their first response? It's the Heisman, Get away from me. I don't want anything to do with this. It's actually repellent to most people. And this helps us understand why. And when we understand why, then we can sympathize with people. We can say, I understand that. You feel naked around God. Oh yeah, that's it. If he can actually see my innermost being, I don't want him to see that because I'm ashamed of this. Well, the Bible begins with this idea of nakedness and shame. And then what happens? We know the story real well. Adam and Eve, what did they do? They got out the sewing machine and sewed fig leaves on, and it was a fig leaf. God could see right through it, so to speak. It didn't do the job. It didn't cover them properly. Okay? And so what happened? What was next? God brought them an animal skin. And I pointed out to these guys that, well, what happened to the animal that was in the skin? Well, he's no more. So, in a way, this is the first death that occurred in the Bible. Substitutionary death. And they were covered over with clothing that was chosen by God and provided to them by God. It sets the scene for us to be able to talk about sacrifice. And for those of us who study at all Hebrew or know Hebrew at all, what is one of the words that is translated sacrifice, especially in Leviticus? Korban. And what does korban mean? Yeah, we all know this. I'm preaching to the choir here, so to speak. But it's derived from the word karov, which is to draw near. And if you read the 5 chapters of Leviticus that deal with the truma offerings, the free will offerings and sacrifices, in Hebrew there's some really neat plays on the word korban and karov. And you'll see these words repeatedly, and they're very clever plays on words when you read them in the Hebrew. But the point is that animal sacrifice and animal dying is the primary way that God chose to show us how to draw near to him. Sacrifice is not something that it just appeases this angry God, which is the primary thing that people think of. Okay, you got this angry God up there waiting to zap you, and the only way you're going to appease him is to kill a bunch of animals so he's happy. Okay, something had to die, so I'm happy. No, the picture is God uses this as a way to say that just like Adam and Eve were hidden from me, they have to have the right kind of clothing. And animal sacrifice is the picture God gave us to understand how we draw near to Him. So the one word that we use for sacrifice is draw near. So the sacrifices that God gives us allow us to come into His presence. And how do they do that? What is the other concept that is associated with sacrifice in the Bible? Blood and atonement, right? It's a strange word. What does atonement mean? In Hebrew, what does it mean? It's Yom Kippur, Yom HaKippurim, the day of coverings. So it's the day of atonement, it's a day of coverings. You begin to see, this isn't difficult to understand. Once we see it, it's so clear. It's covering. Kippah, as in covering. The sacrifices provide a covering for us. Something happened in the garden. Okay, when Adam and Eve fell, when they gained their knowledge of good and evil, and they gained their understanding that they were naked, they became separated from God. God was now hidden from them. They couldn't be in His presence because they were naked and they had shame. That changed the initial situation where they were naked and could walk with God, changed forever. We're never going back to that. So there's a sense in which we don't return to the Garden of Eden. There's a sense in which we don't return to the same state that we were before. From now until eternity, from that time until eternity, every person who's going to be in the presence of God has to be covered over. Pure and simple. This is very consistent all the way through the Bible, from the very, very beginning to the very end. The man and his wife were naked, were not ashamed. I heard the sound of you in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked. So I hid myself. At the very, very end of the Bible, we have the same sort of a picture. Here's this really strange parable about this guy who's going to a wedding feast, okay? This is in Matthew 22. Go to the main highways. Many as you find there, invite to the wedding feast. It's cool. Anyone can be invited to the wedding feast. But when the king came in to look over the dinner guests, he saw a man there who was not dressed in wedding clothes. Anyone thought, this is the strangest thing. So why is God concerned about our clothing? Isn't it just come as you are, dressed down? I asked about a dress code here, and David made it clear. He said the one thing that's not allowed are open-toed shoes. So I don't have my Birkenstocks on. It's a terrible thing, David, but I couldn't find them, so I'm okay. God has dress standards for the wedding feast. We don't really understand that or why that is, but if we put it in the context of the sacrifices being a covering, it begins to make sense. When the king came in to look over the dinner guests, he saw a man who was not dressed in wedding clothes. And he said to him, "Friend, how did you come in here without wedding clothes?" And the man was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, "Bind him hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." That's hard to understand, and it seems so harsh, unless we understand that if we're in God's presence without clothing, we're dead. It's kind of like being, going to a tanning salon and falling asleep. You wake up and you're toast. We can't be in God's presence without appropriate clothing, without appropriate protection. This is in the Gospels, speaking of the wedding feast that's still in the future. At the end of days, we have a description of the bride of the Messiah. And what do we know about the bride of the Messiah? The Bible goes on and on and on about how she's dressed. Isn't that neat? She's dressed in wedding clothes. She is decked out. Let us rejoice and be glad and give the glory to Him, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and His bride has made herself ready. This is Revelation 19. It was given to her to clothe herself in fine linen, bright and clean. For the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. Isn't that interesting? We participate in getting ourselves decked out so that we can be in the presence of God. How do we know that we've come to know him? By walking in his commandments, John tells us. There's a relationship between the clothing that God provides for us and being acceptable to him. You need to think about that for a while, but this is a very biblical concept. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. So being clothed appropriately is associated with being able to actually be in the presence of the Most High. There's another strange picture here that I'll just give you guys, since you're very familiar with the tabernacle and the fact that there's a veil, right, that separates the Holy of Holies from the outer holy place. And no one is allowed to enter through that veil, because if they do, what happens? They die, because you're in the unmitigated presence of God and you don't have anything on to protect you, and so you die. Well, I'm going to submit to you, you guys aren't going to like me for this, but I'm going to submit to you that that veil is still there. In Hebrews, what are we told the veil is a representation of? The body of the Messiah. We enter into the presence of God, not moving the veil out of the way, but through the veil. The Messiah is our clothing. You see the connection. He's the one who died for us, the sacrifice for us. He is our clothing. So the Bible talks about, especially in the New Covenant scriptures, ultimately, what do we put on? We put on the Messiah. He became sin for us so that we might become the righteousness of God in the Messiah. And then we can now talk to the nations, because we're clothed properly. We can be in the presence of the Most High. We're clean. We understand the difference between unclean and clean. And we can cross over now into that world where God dwells and be in his presence, because we have the right clothing. When these guys heard this, it was like for the first time they were saying, I've never understood what sacrifice was about. 2 of these 12 guys, they became believers. And I know they became believers because one of them was the one who was most hostile, and he was angry and always asking really challenging questions. Well, he was living with his girlfriend at the time, and I found out 6 months later, the guy that had invited me to do the study, he does full-time campus ministry, said, this guy, he kicked his girlfriend out and then got engaged to her. He said, that's an amazing thing, because you just don't see that in college. He began to understand that the rules of the kingdom of heaven are not the rules of the world, and I have to change. And this guy and his friend, who also attended, they became believers, and now they're leading Bible studies in their dorm, and he's engaged to this girl, and she moved back home with her parents. Let me tell you, that's a testimony. When people understand this, it's not hard to understand, but it's a perspective, it's a thread. Why do we need clothes? Because we're naked and we're ashamed. There's a lot of imagery in the Bible about the other side, so let's look at that a little bit. A lack of clothing is almost always associated with shame. Nakedness is shameful in the eyes of the Most High. Revelation 16:15. Behold, I'm coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and keeps his clothes, so that he will not walk about naked and men will not see his shame. So if you think the Lord's coming, no skinny dipping. Someone might steal your clothes. Keep your clothes. And the 10 horns which you saw, Revelation 17:16, and the beast, these will hate the harlot and will make her desolate and naked, and eat her flesh and burn her up with fire. Revelation 3, verse 17, because you say, I am rich and have become wealthy and have need of nothing, and you do not know that you're wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. See the picture? Nakedness is associated with shame, and it's natural. People understand that. They connect with that. This corresponds to my reality. They may not agree with it, but they recognize that there's a connection of the Bible to their reality. Verse 18 of the same passage. I advised you to buy from me gold refined by fire so that you may become rich, and white garments so that you may clothe yourself, that the shame of your nakedness shall not be revealed, and eye salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see. In Samuel, 1 Samuel 20, Saul's anger burned against Jonathan. He said to him, he's shaming his son, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you're choosing the son of Jesse to your own shame and the shame of your mother's nakedness? Saul understood this even. Nakedness and shame go hand in glove. When David returned to his household, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how the king of Israel distinguished himself today. He uncovered himself today in the eyes of his servants, as servants' maids, as one of the foolish ones shamelessly uncovers himself. Okay, so shame and nakedness are intimately associated in the Bible. Those who hate you will be clothed with shame, and the tent of the wicked will be no longer. Your nakedness, Isaiah 47:3, your nakedness will be uncovered. Your shame will be exposed. I will take vengeance and will not spare a man. So from these passages, we can glean that something happened that fundamentally changed Adam and Eve's relationship to God and all their descendants. We have to have clothing in order to enjoy the presence of God. Who's our clothing? It's a wonderful way to talk about the death of the Messiah and his sacrifice for us. That's the only clothing that's appropriate. Sure, we can build fig leaves. I can sit under the Bodhi tree all day and hope that the leaves will cover me. You know what a Bodhi tree is? It's a Buddhist tree of the tree of knowledge, and you sit under it and you get this all knowledge to soak in. It's a fig leaf. It's not appropriate. God won't accept it no matter what we do. There are many paths up the mountain, but only one has the right clothing. And we can end up at the wedding feast and not have the right clothes on. And the poor person that's in that boat is in trouble, but pity the person that taught him that. I think there are some warning passages in the Gospels about teachers. And if we teach people the wrong thing, they'll stumble. But woe to the person that teaches them that. You might as well just throw yourself in the lake, because when I get done with you, God says, you'll wish you were dead. That's the warning about teaching the wrong thing to people and causing them to stumble. We need to have a clear idea, not of what we think, but of what God thinks and what he says about this. And clothing is a beautiful way to demonstrate that. I don't know, what time is it? Oh, it's 3:00, so I have a few minutes? Good. So I have time to cough again, right? So I'll turn. The threads that we've been following, there's two worlds. There's a kingdom of heaven. There's a world of sin and death. Our task is to recognize the two worlds. All the things that we learn, all the disciplines that we have, and I'll even submit to you all the disciplines that emanate from the Torah of the Orthodox Jewish lifestyle, including the laws of kashrut and these sorts of things, were tools to help us recognize those two worlds. I had a wonderful conversation with a friend of mine. He's a professor of Greek and New Testament studies at Asbury Seminary. And we have lunch about once a month over the last several years. And, oh, this has honey in it, doesn't it? That's good stuff. Also has camphor and menthol. I love it. Better living through chemistry, you know. Yes, and caffeine to keep awake. What more could one ask, right? So we were talking, and he came to me and he said, I want to talk about the kosher laws. And it was a really neat thing that this guy saw. He said that the kosher laws, the kinds of animals that were forbidden to eat, all of them in one way or another gain their sustenance from death. Vultures, what do? They eat They eat dead possums, okay? What do rats eat? They rat anything that moves or has been moving, okay? All of the things that were forbidden, in one way or another, gain their sustenance from death. So what we eat helps us recognize the world of sin and death. Maybe it's in a physical sense, but it points to a spiritual reality. Have you ever thought of them in that way? This isn't for us. It's not primarily for my health. It's primarily so that we can have spiritual eyes to discern these two kingdoms. And this wonderful Christian guy pointed that out to me, who I observed kashrut, and I'd never seen that. Okay. Why do I do this? I don't know. It's a tradition. You know? That's very often what we think. But he pointed that, and I began thinking about that. And so we all understand why catfish and shellfish aren't kosher, because what did they do? They scavenge dead things off the bottom of the rivers and the oceans. Okay, why can't we eat horses or camels? They're not kosher, right? But they're very similar to cows. Well, horses and camels, they're animals of war, and war is the domain of sin and death. Why couldn't David build the temple? Because he was a man of bloodshed. He killed people. His son, who was a man of peace, got the task. Okay, so God wants us to recognize the world of sin and death and the kingdom of heaven, and he even gave us eating habits to help us recognize, so that we could make distinctions between the clean and the unclean. The clean is associated with the kingdom of heaven. Unclean is associated with the world of sin and death. Next time you're in the store and you're looking for the funny little circle U, okay, think about that. Don't think about, wow, I'm so cool because I keep kosher. Think about, is this helping me recognize the distinction between those two worlds? Because we have to cross over into the world of sin and death, and God wants us to know when we're doing that. That's what baptism is all about. Again, these are pictures that most people have no idea why we do these things, but it's so clear, it makes so much sense. When you're unclean, ritually unclean, because you've come into contact with something from the world of sin and death, like a corpse or something like this, right? You're unclean. You have to step outside the camp for a particular time, because there's a boundary. And so through practice, we recognize that, oh, I've been involved in sin and death. Not necessarily morally, but I've come into contact with that. And God wants us to recognize that, because he wants us, of all people, to make that distinction and recognize we're of the kingdom of heaven. We're not citizens of the world of sin and death. We have a new passport, and we've been kicked out of that world. We're no longer citizens. That ruler no longer has authority over us. And so everything that we do has to do with making those distinctions and being able to recognize that. And I encourage you, the things that you do in your life, the disciplines that you do, see them as tools that God has given us to recognize those two worlds, not as just things we can do to ingratiate ourselves in his eyes, because that's not what he likes. He likes us to have his heart and his eyes so that we can present him to the nations. We're the light. We're the only light shining in the darkness. Is this new stuff to anyone? You ever seen these threads before? This was, it was so neat talking to these college guys, and I could describe sacrifice in a way that they could understand. And now I can say, do you at least understand why the Bible says there's only one way to God? We have to be covered, and he's the one that teaches us how to be covered. He's the one that tells us what kind of clothes we can wear. You may not like it. You may not even agree with it. But this is our story, and like the song says, I'm sticking to it. Okay? This is our story, and we need to learn to practice that story so that we can explain to people, yeah, you can come in, you can enjoy this for a while, but don't think you're a part of it until you have appropriated the right clothing yourself. Because there may come a time when someone will say, okay, it's inspection time. Do you have the right clothes on? So The world of sin and death, the kingdom of heaven, and being able to pass between them. Clothing is that consistent thread throughout the Bible that helps explain that. It puts all of this stuff in the tabernacle, all of these sacrifices that we were given, into perspective. Have you ever thought that when the Messiah is introduced, what is he introduced as? A lamb. Now that's strange. Speaking to someone that has no concept of who God is or anything like that. Well, how do we know the Messiah? Well, he's the Lamb of God. What? Lamb? What does that have to do with anything? The clothing puts it in perspective. We can now talk about redemption and sacrifice and coming near to God and having a covering. By the way, the Day of Atonement, which a lot of people know about, very often we're told that, Christians will tell me this. In the Old Testament, you had these sacrifices just covered you over, but we have Jesus and he takes it all away. The picture is actually very different. On the Day of Atonement, how many goats are there? 2. One goat goes into the Holy of Holies, and we don't see what happens there, but he dies. And what is that one called? That's the atonement. That's the covering that's provided for us. What does the other goat do? Yeah, the guys put their hands on the head of the goat and transfers the sins of the people onto the goat, and he goes off into the great outdoors, never to return. The Day of Atonement does 2 things. Takes away our sin, provides a covering for us. We don't have the covering, we can't come into God's presence. It's a beautiful picture of what the Messiah has done for us. In a positive way, atonement, covering, helps us explain how we can come back into God's presence. It's nice and it's clear in the Bible. Okay, there's another thread that I'd kind of like to talk about just a little bit here, and then we'll finish up real soon here. When people start to understand this, now we can say, look, there's an exclusive remedy, only one remedy for the ills of mankind. There's one remedy for getting out of the world of sin and death, where whether you know it or like it or not, you're enslaved to someone who hates you and fears you and is doing everything to destroy you, because that's the normal world. And you can explain to people that, hey, look, you're doing all these things that you think it's such a good idea at the time, but the end result is chaos in your life. And if you get involved with practically anyone these days, you know that behind the surface, people are messed up. And it gives us a way to empathize and sympathize and say, yes, that's the normal state of affairs. But I have an answer for that. You can cross over into the kingdom of heaven. And what does that look like? Because there are consequences of living in the kingdom of heaven. So when someone asks you the question, well, why can't you just accept my lifestyle as it is? Why do you demand that I have to get married before we live together? Why do you demand that we have to have this and we have to live in a certain way? Now you have a way to begin talking about this. These are the rules of the road for the kingdom of heaven. You want to see long life? Follow these rules. You want to be in the presence of the Most High, he says, these are the rules of this kingdom, and we don't call the shots. It's a package deal. So you can talk about these things now in a non-confrontational, non-accusatory way. Say, hey, we have a different master, we have different rules, and we have a job. You're unemployed over here. You're just living for yourself. Over here, you have a job. We have a job. We're supposed to be a light to the nations. We're supposed to demonstrate the righteousness of God to the nations. And we do that by building community. I like to tell the inmates that I work with that you really want to be in a situation where you are learning to have each other's backs, not stabbing each other in the back. And there's a big difference. When you never know if the person you're working with is your friend or your enemy. That's a pretty scary thing. But that's the way the world is. Before I came to faith, I was living on the street at 15 years old. involved in drugs and that whole culture. And I never knew whether people were my friends or my enemies. One day, well, 1 minute they might be, and the next minute they're raving lunatics because they're on an acid trip or something. Okay? You never know. You're just paranoid. But you come into the kingdom of heaven and you're part of a community where we're bound by the rules to care for one another, even if we don't like one another. So I like to point out to these guys, look, the Torah tells us that when you have someone that hates you and something goes wrong in their life, you have an obligation to help them. There are 2 or 3 situations where that's specifically described. We have an obligation to our neighbor, even if we think he hates us. The parable of the Good Samaritan is a beautiful picture of that. Enemies caring for one another. That's the kingdom of heaven. We don't sugarcoat it. We don't pretend that it's a utopia. But the kingdom of heaven, it's a mixed bag. What is the major thread of the kingdom of heaven? When people ask, why are you all so focused on Israel? What do we answer? Well, they're cool. It's wonderful to be Jewish. That's a joke because only Jews think that. Outsiders don't. They don't. And so we have to have an answer to that. What is it about the people of Israel? Well, I'm going to submit to you the people of Israel are a picture of the kingdom of heaven. God chose Israel not to get the 19th hole. Everyone knows what the 19th hole is, right? You go golfing, and after you're done, you go sit in the 19th hole and drink until you can't see your score. Everybody seems to think that heaven is this wonderful fantasy land, ultimate vacation land. It's Disneyland to the nth degree, the castle in the clouds and all that. That's not the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is here today, where we're learning to live with one another. We're building community. We're practicing being his servants so that we can be a light to the nation. Israel wasn't chosen just to get the blessing. Israel was chosen to bring the blessing of God to the nations, because his heart is a reconciliation of a broken creation. That's his heart, and that's our job, is to be that light so that people will be attracted and will come to us. And so we can now talk about the people of Israel and how we're connected to them. And this is the community that God has chosen, the only community that he has chosen to display himself to the world. Because as we learned, God is hidden from the world. That's really the only effective way that we can perceive God, is through his people. And everyone that has made a confession of faith in the Jewish Messiah has signed up to that mission. And we need to become aware of that so that we can be an effective light in darkness. Does this make sense? There's an exclusive remedy to get into the kingdom of heaven, and it comes exclusively through one group of people. This is why Paul says that whenever a non-Jew comes into relationship with the Messiah, he also comes into relationship with Israel. He becomes a part of the commonwealth of Israel. And we take upon ourselves that same task that Israel was given. Isn't that a nice picture? So we have 3 threads that we really want to learn to develop. Explaining the 2 worlds, that there's a separation and a distinction, and the rules are different for each one. Darkness, light, clean, unclean, good knowledge, bad knowledge, a narrow path, a broad path. Clothing versus living in Florida, nakedness. How does God fix it so that people who are naked and ashamed can come back into his presence? He provides clothing for us so that we can be in his presence. You talk about clothing, you talk about the Messiah. This is why we have faith in the Messiah. This is why we have to believe that he died and rose again from the dead for us, that he died for our sins. This is the classic statement of faith. We now have a way to describe that so that it makes sense to people. And why are we part of the kingdom of heaven? Why are we part of the people of Israel? Because being a light to the nations is bound up with the exclusive call of Israel. That's in Genesis 3:16. The seed of the woman and the Satan. Genesis 12:1-3, the calling of Abraham. And what was the point of the calling of Abraham? To be a blessing to the nations. And in you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Are we participating in that? Or are we still hanging on to the world of sin and death? Genesis 22:17-18. Numbers 24:22 all speak of this exclusive calling. It's transferred from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to the sons of Israel to all those who have faith in the Messiah of Israel, who is the King of Israel. He's the Lion of Judah. All these names we have for him as being associated with his people. We're a part of that. It's in John 4:22, John 14:16, and in Revelation 21 and 22, we see wonderful pictures of this. Who is the bride who comes down out of heaven? It's the New Jerusalem. Isn't it strange that the bride of the Messiah and the holy city, New Jerusalem, are one and the same? It's the same description. I saw a beautiful city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven, adorned as a bride ready for her husband. You see the picture? The bride of Messiah is actually the people of Israel. How many gates are there in the New Jerusalem? 12 gates. And what's inscribed on the gates? The 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. So there you have the 24 elders. Just a thought. The city of God, the presence of God, the access is through the people of Israel. And if we don't have access to the Messiah's clothing, we get kicked out. But if we have that clothing, if we come in those gates, we once again have access to the tree of life and the river of water of life. And isn't that the desire of everyone, the Holy Grail, the eternal life? That's what we're seeking. It's our job to point this out to people. All right, we have just about 10 minutes left. I want to finish with an exhortation, okay? Everyone knows the story of Jacob and Esau, right? Okay. What does Jacob mean? Heel glabber, right? Okay. This is a really fascinating picture. What does Israel mean? Striving with God. Hosea tells us that in his youth, Jacob contended with Esau, but in his maturity, he struggled with the Most High. As we grow and leave behind the world of sin and death and move into the kingdom of heaven, there's a transfer of our struggles. And I don't want us to get it wrong. When we think that we want to defend the faith and do apologetics and argue with people about what's right and what's wrong, I think more often than not, what we're doing is struggling with the wrong thing. We're struggling with people. We want to contend with the Most High and let God do the struggling with the enemy, because he's the one that conquers the Satan. We don't. Draw near to God and the devil will flee. It doesn't say go out and beat up on him and he'll flee. It says you draw near to God. We're weak, he's strong. The story of Jacob is a fascinating story. He and Esau were blood brothers, weren't they? They were twins. And they struggled together even in the womb. And when they came out, Esau became a metaphor, a picture of the kingdom of sin and death. He's a man of the fields. He's a man who lives for himself. He's the long, tall Texan that goes out and hunts and fishes and brings home the game, right? Everything that he wants is in the here and now. I want this and I want it now, and don't get in my way. He's all for himself. He's a picture of the world of sin and death. Jacob was a part of that world in his youth. And in fact, he was hanging on for dear life to Esau. Everything that Esau had, he wanted. Okay? But God had other plans. As Jacob grew, he was a deceiver. He did all kinds of terrible things to his brother in concert with his mother. We know all those stories. Okay, but I want you to see this picture. And because of that, God sent him away. And he sent him away with absolutely nothing. His mom said, "Get out of here. You don't just leave for a few days until your brother, he's ADD." I told this joke to someone earlier. How many ADD kids does it take to change a light bulb? Let's go ride bikes. Esau was ADD. One minute he's going to kill his brother, the next minute he's okay, and his mom saw that. So he said, "Just go away for a few days and he'll chill out, and then you can come back." So Jacob leaves and he has nothing. And it's as if he's now growing up and he's moving into the kingdom of heaven. And so what does he do? He meets the master deceiver and manipulator himself. Okay? His relative, Lavan, right? And Lavan does all these things to him that he used to do to Esau. So I guess one way to put it is that Jacob got what he used to dish out in spades from Laban for the rest of his life. But what Jacob learned was integrity. He learned how to respond to that in appropriate ways. He didn't respond in kind with trickery and deceiving and thievery. He responded with integrity. And he confronted Lavan at the end of their relationship. All this time, what have I done? I told you what I was going to do from the beginning. I chose the smaller parts of the flocks, and it's not my fault that God caused the increase. And he said, "This is all from the hand of the Most High. It's not me." And Laban understood that. When Jacob returned, when he left, he was struggling with his brother Esau. He was struggling with the world of sin and death. When Jacob returned, he began struggling with God. And God changed his name, and he said, "Now you'll be known as the one who contends with me." Are we a people who are hanging on like Jacob to the world of sin and death? Or are we letting go of that and learning how to hang on and struggle with the Most High? It's not easy. It's a struggle. And we'll come away wounded, just like Jacob did. But then we become known as the people of God, and we contend with God. I want you to think about that in our lives. If we can make a distinction between the world of sin and death and the kingdom of heaven, where are our struggles? Are we letting go, like Jacob, from Esau, from the things of this world? And are we focusing and struggling now with the Most High? Do we really believe the things that we say when we put the Torah away? That it's a tree of life, and those who cling to God will have life? Do we really cling to God as if He is the tree of life? Or are we hanging on to Esau's heel? So I'll submit to you that Jacob's life, his life is a picture of our moving from the world of sin and death into relationship with God. It doesn't happen at once. It took how many years? How many years was Jacob living with Laban? It was more than 2. At least 20 years. Right, but then he stayed even longer after that. So I think he said something like 20 years. I asked the guys at prison to tell me that. They're supposed to give me that answer when I come back. I like to give homework when I don't have the answers because I can't count past 4. He had 20 years to learn to give up the deceit and the trickery and the hanging on to the world of sin and death. He had 20 years to learn that. And then when he returned to Esau, he was a transformed man. I mean, we hear a lot of negative sermons about this, but when Jacob returned to Esau, he was transformed. He was no longer trying to get anything from Esau. He presented himself, "I'm your servant." He was transformed by his struggles with the Most High. And now all of his wealth, he was saying, "I'm willing to give it to my brother," instead of hanging on to it. And there was reconciliation. Not ultimately, because we know that Esau, ultimately, he sought for repentance with tears and didn't find it. But Jacob learn to reconcile with his brother. When we struggle with God, when we cut the ties and become part of the kingdom of heaven and recognize the world of sin and death, we can now reconcile with people who are there instead of fighting with them. And we have the ability to usher them to the borders so we can say, now, if you want to come in, here's the bridge. It's our Messiah. Think about that as you go home. I'll call it now.
For more information, visit us at www.etzheim.org. That's spelled EITZ-CHAIM.org. Or join us in Richardson, Texas for our weekly Shabbat services.